Good afternoon. Thanks to everybody who made time to join us on a Friday afternoon with last minute's notice. We really appreciate the opportunity to share a little more with you about what the heck this surprise SBEC meeting is about and provide a few updates for you there. This one has happened and evolved rather quickly, and so it's very rare that we do this, but these are very rare times we're living in, and we're trying to be as responsive as we can to everything that's going on. So with that in mind, we'll offer a few logistical reminders, and then we will give you a little more info about what's on the agenda. First, a quick reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted as soon as we can get it posted for those who aren't able to join here, and kind of keeping with the practice we've adopted recently with our Ed Prep Advisory Committee meetings. We'll maybe skip introductions today because we're moving kind of quick and we've got a lot of time on here. Would ask that folks mute your microphone unless you are speaking. Please feel free to use the chat functions for questions and comments, and we will also give space for folks to unmute themselves when they need to speak or ask for clarification. So we have all been doing the Zoom or Teams or other format for long enough now. I think everybody's kind of got the drill, but I just wanted to sort of circle back to those meeting norms as we dive in. So would like to start with the COVID-19 related SBEC proposal, and then we know that testing capacity continues to be a front of mind issue for everyone, and provide a real quick update there with more to come early next week as it relates to testing capacity. So first, a little context around waivers and flexibility as we have worked through these issues. Importantly, the Commissioner of Education does not have statutory authority to waive SBEC rules. That's something we've discussed a little bit as we've moved through the process of trying to ensure real-time and immediate feedback for the evolving COVID-19 situation. We are, by and large, dependent on governor's waivers of SBEC rules or appropriate statute, and these are directly connected to a disaster declaration. And so we are still under the terms of the disaster declaration from Governor Abbott. When that disaster is lifted or expires, the waiver provisions that are in effect expire. And so that is important context as we think about sort of the term or how these waivers work, and within the context of the rule language we're going to share with you in a minute. Additionally, I want to note that SBEC rulemaking timeline doesn't allow for quickly providing flexibility beyond some very specific circumstances and timelines. So if something needs immediate effective date, then the waiver is the only way we can effectuate that. With things that take a little longer time, we can get that done through SBEC rulemaking. So you saw that previously with the accountability system rule discussion item we have that will be proposed on July 24th SBEC meeting. There are some other things, and so this is what brought us here today with another rule proposal that we felt like could work within this time period. As you all know, in March, Governor Abbott, with 2 T's, yes, we know how to spell his name, waived requirements for candidates completing clinical teaching and internships in the 2019-20 academic year. These were specifically related to concepts of the virtual setting and face-to-face observations. So recognizing that schools had to pivot away from a traditional in-classroom setting, this waiver addressed for that limited time period what would happen with those candidates. So importantly, that waiver does not apply for the upcoming academic year. And so that is a distinction there that's important, and that has sort of brought us to where we are today. So I would like to sort of, with that context, turn it over to Dr. Olesen to provide a little more about the rule proposal that SBEC will be considering next week.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And it does let me fix it on the fly, so it should be fixed now. Sorry about that. The agenda for the special SBEC meeting that's happening next week is really limited. And it's really limited to one provision that we're looking at, addition to 228.1. 228 is rules related to educator preparation program requirements. And so what we're pursuing as far as an additional provision going into 228.1 would allow flexibility if schools are still operating in non-traditional settings. So as Ryan mentioned, the previous waiver allowed for internships and clinical teaching that were happening at the end of the 1920 year. If those settings converted to being virtual, it allowed for those internships and clinical teaching to still finish out. And similarly, it allowed for face-to-face observations to not have to occur, given that we've shifted over into a virtual setting. So what we've done and what we'll be proposing to the SBEC here is crafted to address this unique situation. For those folks doing clinical teaching, internships, practicums, and the piece around observations, to be limited to the 2020-2021 academic year. We feel this retains the quality expectations for educator preparation. We know that with the current situation, our teachers need to be better prepared than ever. And so, but we also need to make sure that we're allowing that preparation to continue to happen given the changing in settings. Also important to note, this doesn't impact testing or other issues. This is really around the clinical experience. So what I'd like to share with you is the rule language that we will be proposing to the SBEC. And where this goes is in 228.1, there's an A, a B, a C, a D. D was crafted specifically around when we have these localized temporary emergency pieces. And then E, what we've done here is we've said for the purposes of educator preparation training under 228.35, which is where the requirements around internships and clinical teaching reside, that during the 2020-2021 academic year, and then we call out some terms. Actual school settings and authentic school settings may include campuses that have a traditional in-person setting that are temporarily functioning as a virtual setting. And then also the piece for face-to-face settings, that those observations may include synchronous virtual settings. So like to look at the impact specifically within rule language about what that means. So the first term is actual school setting. So where that's at in 228.35 is in E6 and in E8A. And in E6, what it says an internship or clinical teaching experience must take place in an actual school setting. So what the new provision adds or allows for is that if the campus where a clinical teacher has been assigned, if the campus where an intern is doing their internship, if that usually traditional campus is utilizing a virtual setting, this would allow for that internship to be allowed under 228.35 E6. Similarly, E8A is a similar provision, but for educators who are completing a practicum, so our non-teacher educators. By broadening the definition of actual school setting, that would also apply to E8A, allowing folks doing a counselor practicum, a principal practicum, for those to be taking place in schools that are temporarily in a virtual setting as well. So that would allow for those experiences to be in those virtual settings for the 2020-2021 academic year. So that's why we've included the term actual school setting. The next term we've included is authentic school setting. So authentic school setting is included in 228.35 E1 big A and Romanet I, and then E8B. And in both those places, those are the rule provisions related to field-based experiences. And field-based experiences per Romanet I there need to take place in authentic school settings. So what the new provision would do, it would allow us to interpret that wording around authentic school settings to be, again, those campuses that are functioning in a virtual space temporarily. And so this would work during the 2020-2021 academic year. The third term that we're looking at is face-to-face setting. So where face-to-face setting shows up in the rules is in 228.35G1. And what it does there is it talks about teacher observations, observations for teacher candidates. And that provision says formal observations have to be 45 minutes, field supervisor has to do them, and it says it has to happen in a candidate site in a face-to-face setting. So by broadening the definition for 2020, 2021 of what a face-to-face setting means, it would allow for those observations to take place in that virtual setting for 2020, 2021. Now, face-to-face also comes up in a couple of other places in 22835. It comes up when it talks about practicum observations, and it also comes up in J2C Romanet 2. In both of those provisions, though, face-to-face is it's called out as allowing for observations that don't happen in a face-to-face setting. So the important place where this is in rule language is in G1. So those are like I said, it's a really limited and sort of tightly targeted proposal for the SBEC to consider at this special meeting of the SBEC. Do folks?
There are several, I sort of alluded to some of the reasons why it's narrowly focused and tightly limited, and it has to do with the time by which it takes effect and goes into place. So we're really trying to cover, have things in place that will work for the fall candidates, and we'll get things started there, and then we'll cover them in the event other things change. I think we've all heard so much about schools trying to plan for a lot of different modes of instruction in the fall, and we just wanted to make sure we were being as accommodating toward that. I think it will be very regionalized and maybe very different from district to district and very different regions around the state, what those look like. And so I think that's what we were trying to do. I think we're going to talk about testing after this, but I want to stop and see if folks have a question about kind of how this rule change would work or what it would address.
Ryan, this is Donna at Tech. Will there be any type of special documentation for reporting that the observations were in a virtual setting or anything like that?
Right now, we are not planning on necessitating additional reporting related to this. Related to, if those observations are taking place in a virtual setting. You will still have to apply, just like you do right now, you will have to enter in the standard observation record into ECOS. That is the existing reporting isn't being waived, but additional reporting isn't being stood up related to this.
Okay, thank you. And so currently they made some adjustments to the time as well, but that's not applying here. It's just that it can happen in a virtual setting.
That's right.
Thank you.
Mark, if you could go back to the slide about the synchronous observation, I think you are there maybe.
So this is where I think what we were being asked to take a look at.
So to be clear, this is Patrice. Observations would need to be synchronous at the time. Okay, so we're not going to be allowing for asynchronous, like video recording of a teaching episode and then watching the video recording. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and so thank you for your question, Dr. Warner. I think where we're going with this is we are trying to allow for flexibility, but following the approach that the SBEC has already taken, right? And the SBEC has already taken, you know, with having face-to-face observations required would kind of automatically mean synchronous. So the idea here is that we're allowing the flexibility on the setting because the settings have necessarily changed. But you know, that sort of like having that in the moment observation, being able to immediately meet afterwards and immediately beforehand conference and have those observations. So we're trying to follow along with what's there and what the SBEC has already expressed as priorities while providing flexibility for the change in settings.
Okay, thank you. I was just wanting to make sure I understood correctly. Appreciate it.
For sure.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Veronica. Question for you. So what we want to, you're trying to be proactive, and just in case something happens and we have to go to virtual observations, this is basically saying there's not going to be a waiver of saying you're not going to, like this year, complete all 5. It's going to occur. But maybe my suggestion would be if we could, and maybe doesn't have to be in code, and I don't know because I don't know the legalities of it, but having a little more feedback from you all so that we can all be doing the same thing for the synchronous virtual setting of, for example, if I'm observing an intern, can I be in their Google Classroom virtually, or do I have to be next to the intern observing what they're doing? So can I be virtually part of the classroom observing? Would I need permission to be in virtually? Or the option of, I can always pre-plan with the student ahead of time, go sit next to them and observe them actually maneuvering the classroom and seeing if they're interacting, but maybe having, so that it can be more consistent. The issue is equity and accountability. So because it's equity and accountability, maybe having a little more synchronous virtual setting is, we need to see this, or it's defined as, or it includes the option of the field supervisor can be sitting next to the intern or clinical teacher, or be virtually connected. Obviously, are we going to have the pre-conference and post-conference can occur virtually, so, because that's what we're doing for everything else right now, that we're not meeting face-to-face. So setting up a meeting to do the pre-conference and the post-conference, that is obviously an option, but the actual observation, if it's virtual,
So
it would be subject to interpretation.
So I'm gonna thank you, Dr. Galvan, for that. I think that our where I think we were going with this is that it would allow for either one of those settings that you're talking about. So if a field supervisor wanted to sit and observe, you know, sort of in real life, a candidate maneuver and work in a virtual classroom, I think that would be allowed, certainly. And what additional flexibility I think would be what the alternative version that you're thinking about, which is where the field supervisor could log in and do the observation, you know, kind of from that perspective as well. Of course, there would, just like there is when a field supervisor, you know, works with campus staff in order to gain access to campus, those issues would necessarily need to be worked out with the program, the field supervisor, and the site in order to ensure access. Again, those are access issues that y'all already get to solve.
We're gonna have to deal with, yes.
Yep. So I think that there's a similarity there. And I think that we are, what we're trying to do is to provide flexibility. So I think that both of those settings that you've described there would be allowed.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Alexander, do you want to speak to your question a little more?
Well, I'm sort of reacting to a few comments where we've had some students say that they are afraid that they will catch the coronavirus, and so they don't, if our schools are in session, they're not sure they want to go back into the classroom. They would rather stay virtual. And I mean, we can work on that from a university perspective. It's much easier for me to think about how to deal with that in terms of like the 15 hours of early field experience and things than it is for me to think about student teaching. But I guess I was just wondering if you all have thought through accommodations or an accommodation process should someone like to claim that, you know, they had high blood pressure and therefore are more at risk and don't want to go into the schools.
We have not really talked about that situation much. I think the nature of teaching, even not during a pandemic, presents a lot of opportunities that, you know, like you get exposed to a whole lot of things. And I remember being very sick intermittently the first while teaching, because building up my immune system, it helped prepare me for having my own children down the road. You know, at some level, I'm not sure that that's something that's easily accommodated through state policy, just given the nature of teaching is that you kind of have to be teaching real students, and whether you're teaching them in a virtual setting, which this will provide that opportunity, or you're teaching them in person. But we'll definitely noodle on that. And if you have any other thoughts as you kind of reflect on where we're going here, definitely have to have that conversation. I'm not sure how far we can go in state policy to accommodate that, but definitely happen to engage on that further.
Yeah, the thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, say, the 15 hours of early field-based stuff, we could move from one semester to another. You know, say if we're waiting for a vaccine, that would be easy enough. I mean, that I can manage. The student teaching hours, I haven't figured out. Either we delay their graduation, we graduate them without certification, and they can go back. And then maybe we need you all to help us at that point if that's the only thing they're missing. So I think there's a little challenge just to think through. I'm hoping this is a short-term problem related to the fact that we don't have a vaccine, and that in a year we're not having this conversation. That would be ideal to me. But I think for those in the high-risk group, I'm particularly worried about. So if they complete everything but their student teaching and we graduate them, normally we would push them into a post-bac or an alt-cert program. But if that's all they're missing, we may need some support from you all to have a different kind of extra semester training that's not an alt-cert. I really have not a clue.
No, I think we definitely happy to engage in that further. I think this is all such new ground for all of us, for the candidates, just for everyone. And so I think we're definitely happy to continue thinking about that and what that might look like. So I appreciate you raising that, because that's really has not been on our radar, but it's something we should talk about what that might look like.
I wanted to, Dr. Weinbaum, you had your hand raised. If you wanted to go ahead and unmute and share a question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, hi, thank you. My question is about the summer term, and other than teaching, like say principals, counselors, if they have access to schools in the summer, the observations, if they don't have access to the schools, are they carried over from the spring? Or, I mean, how is it working for this summer?
So thanks for the question. So observations for practicum already under current rule are allowed to be non-face-to-face. There's just, I think you have to make sure that you have a pre and post conference related to it. So if you have candidates that are completing practicum this summer and it's happening in a virtual setting, I believe currently you can do that. You can do observations virtually.
Okay. Yeah, I just wondered if the wording in E, if that would have changed any of that, but it looks like that's going to stay the same. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that it, like I said, it already allows for it.
Okay. Thank you.
And I know we just have a few more minutes here, and we do have some testing updates. Was there anything else on this for us? And we can, of course, follow up after this, but additional clarity?
I know we're throwing a lot fast and y'all are adapting, and I think the question Dr. Alexander raised is probably one that, with or without COVID, is one we need to sort of talk about the options there and what that means for candidates who graduate with everything but completing some component of their experience, and sort of what that sort of third way or fourth way or whatever might be for them. Let's talk briefly about testing, and then, as always, as y'all have time to sort of noodle on this or reflect or have other questions, this is the proposal phase of the process, so there'll be public comment. We'll have other opportunities to talk. If anything jumps out in the next 6 days or though, we'd love to hear from you, and we're happy to get on the phone or get on Zoom or whatever makes sense to talk about the language. I'm gonna hand it over to Jessica to talk briefly about testing and some things that are going on there, and then I will kind of look forward on testing and think we'll have a little more information on that next week. Jessica?
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate the opportunity to provide some updates on, I know that we've gotten a fair amount of questions related to testing capacity across the state. So just wanted to provide a little bit of context on work we've been engaged in with Pearson to date. So for context, since the very beginning of the pandemic, we've had consistent conversations with Pearson and have been thinking proactively around planning for testing capacity once testing centers came back online beginning in the month of May. Pearson has, for their own Pearson professional centers and for their partner sites, been considering social distancing requirements at least through the summer as they are proactively planning for capacity. So what that means is if a candidate registers for an assessment in the month of August at a Pearson Professional Center, that is already factored in the 50% reduction in capacity or social distancing into that window. And so particularly for our Pearson Professional Centers, there isn't an expectation of further cancellation of testing appointments because that social distancing has already been factored in. In addition, our Pearson Professional Centers have expanded over the course of the past few weeks. They've been working to stand up 2 of what they are calling super centers in San Antonio and Austin, that both have close to 100 seats within them. Idea there is to centrally locate those centers in the state to provide transportation across the state. In addition, Pearson partners with a wide variety of partner centers who also facilitate testing. They've been working to provide technical assistance to those partner centers, supporting them in embedding and factoring in those social distancing requirements in their own scheduling practices, sharing best practices as it relates to acquiring and leveraging PPE, et cetera. And so they've continued to provide that technical assistance. And in addition to that, they've been working extensively to stand up new partner centers across the state, reopen previously closed centers, and are looking to extend hours and days of operation across centers. So for example, if there was a center that was traditionally open Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 8 to 5, that center may now be open Monday through Saturday from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. So extending both number of days and hours within the days. In a recent conversation, they shared that they were looking to extend hours even through 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning for those night owls who might do their best work from midnight to 3 a.m. I know I'm not one of them, but there are folks out there who are, and so they're looking to capture as many hours as there are in the day. I'll turn it back over to Ryan, though, to share a little bit more around thinking about going forward. As we recognize, while all of these proactive measures are being put in place, we do recognize, though, that there are candidates across the state right now who are struggling to register for and take certification exams. And so we just want to acknowledge that despite all these efforts, we do still encounter challenges in regards to testing capacity. So I'm going to turn over to Ryan to share a little bit more.
Thanks, Jessica. So as Jessica said, we do realize that despite everyone's best efforts in a world where we still have the social distancing requirements and we're still taking all those necessary proactive measures around health and safety, we're still going to have testing capacity concerns. And so we've got a few things working, and I'm not in position today to share more of that. I know I hate being cagey, and this is just the way it has to be in the world we live in, but I feel like I'll have more information and more around options on this early next week. So y'all should be looking for an invitation early next week for another town hall meeting where hopefully we can share some additional updates around this and some additional options around testing capacity. So we know that this continues to be a concern, in particular in BTLPT and some of our foreign language exams and some other settings right that. We also recognize that Texas is a big state, and you know, while San Antonio and Austin are close to some places, they are not close to everywhere and not close to many places. So we're still working on this, and I will say if you can give us a couple more days, I think we'll have more information to share. As we consider the timeline around these two special meetings to accommodate this rule proposal we talked about today, we are still going to keep the July 24th SVEC meeting. That will be a bigger SVEC meeting with all sort of the normal agenda. And then the adoption meeting for the item we're considering next week is scheduled for July 31st. And so that's kind of the timeline there. We've added those underlined here just so you sort of have a sense around that. We're trying to work around board member calendars and everything else, but we're optimistic the meeting on next Thursday will be a relatively quick one, and we'll be able to get this item moving forward to provide a little more certainty for the upcoming year. And if y'all have any questions, concerns, please feel free to reach out to us. You know where we are. All right, Dr. Garcia, thank you for raising that about BTLPT. I spent a number of years in the Texas Panhandle, so I recognize how far away and that San Antonio and Austin are. So this is why we're continuing to look and continuing to explore options for those candidates that have to test right now and seeing what we can do there. So more to come on that. Is there anything else before we let you all go? Well, we will send this deck out. I shared the link to the actual agenda item in the chat up above, so you can go in and grab that. But we really appreciate y'all jumping on and all your constant efforts and problem solving to help take care of our candidates in our schools.